You don't know much about film stories, so welcome to Film Stories. You can put on a look on your face as if it's the most read and listened to thing in your entire life, if you want.
Okay, sounds good.
Brilliant. Hello, Nicholas Stoller. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
I am alive, and that's
good.
I
know what?
So.
Being alive is kind of...
You're sat in front of a green screen, so this is going out as video and audio, so this will be useless for the audio. Can we put anything on the green screen? What do you want us to do to you?
I want you to put a photo of me behind me.
Okay. Okay. One of those like old things that used to break a 14-inch television set.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll do that. I read a recent interview with you where you were described as a veteran comedy director. So
yes. That was disturbing when I read that.
I never look up the age of the person I'm interviewing. It's genuinely the first time I've ever done it. You are younger than me, so I think up front we should say that we're here to talk about You're Cordially Invited, and it's two young men in the prime of their lives discussing all of this. Logical place to start then. Nick Park of Aardman.
Yes. Obsessed. I love his.
I'm obsessed
I just watched
as well.
Isn't
it great?
Vengeance
Most Foul. Yeah.
So funny.
Yeah. The Accrington Queen.
The Feathers McGraw is one of the great villains.
I've had the joy of... Our paths have never crossed before, even though I've watched lots of your films. Mm-hmm. But I've had the joy of talking to Nick Park a couple of times. It's quite interesting how I'm not putting words in his mouth, but his role has changed a little bit. So he did a film, Early Man, where he was the sole director, and so couldn't get as much on the animation floor, getting his hands dirty. Mm-hmm. Looking down your credits, appreciating these things never quite work in isolation, as the internet tells us. This is the first sole writing and directing credit for you since Getting to the Greek.
Yeah, I think it is.
And I'm just conscious, it's just like, was there, because you've always been really open about collaborations.
Yeah.
Huge for you.
Yeah.
You always get the sense from the video stuff, from the written stuff. Was there a bit of you that went into it just wanting to do something solely written by you?
No, not really. I don't really, it's always a collaboration when you make a movie.
I get that.
Yeah. So there's not really, and then honestly, usually who's written what is determined by the Writers Guild. And
I understand that as well.
So there's not, the one thing, I love collaborating because you just have more people helping.
Yeah.
And there is a little bit, I do have a little bit of a fear when I'm going in with something that I've written by myself of just like, it's just up to me to make sure it works.
Yeah.
And so when you're working with someone else, another writer, you can constantly be kicking the tires and making sure your movie works and makes sense. Whereas when you're doing it by yourself, which I was doing it by myself on this, I did it by myself in Games of the Greek, and I certainly had people helping. It wasn't purely in isolation. There's a bit more pressure to make sure that I have to make sure it doesn't suck.
But conversely, from the outside looking in, it's mildly surreal, and I don't know whether you ever get used to this. But one day you started writing at a keyboard, presumably, unless you've got a quill and parchment or something like that.
Just a keyboard, yeah.
Yeah, and it's led to us. We would never have met had you not sat down at a keyboard on that one day. I know it's like a weird connection, isn't it? But we're now in an expensive London hotel surrounded by wonderful people filming all of this. Hello, everybody. Do you ever kind of lose that a little bit? Almost the perspective of it?
No, I'm every day feel very, very lucky. And I can't believe my house was bought by jokes. Literally.
Interesting.
And it's something that I think about all the time.
Was it built by drama more than jokes?
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, sure, it's drama, but the jokes come from the drama. But I do often think about that it's like, that I think about that all the time.
Because I've jumped ahead to something I was going to talk about. Because one of the things I found myself a film I found myself thinking at while I was watching You're Cordially Invited is one of my favourite films of all time, which is Parenthood.
Oh yeah. Such a good, I love
which is a drama with jokes on top.
Yeah.
Brilliant jokes on top, but still fundamentally you could strip the jokes out and that film worked.
Yeah.
And I was watching You're Cordially Invited, and it's a family drama, isn't it? You kind of snuck in a little bit under the radar.
Oh yeah. I mean, all of my movies are fundamentally dramas, all of them. And I wouldn't, they have a dramatic structure. They have Sarah Marshall is about a guy who's a borderline alcoholic and who's depressed. Who's suffering from depression, his girlfriend can't handle it anymore, and they break up. Get Him to the Greek is really about addiction. It's like, each of the movies I've done, has that element. Even something like Neighbours, which is,
Bad Neighbours.
Bad Neighbours, sorry. Even something like Bad Neighbours, is about, three characters essentially having nervous breakdowns because they've lost control in their lives, So, and then obviously it's how I approach it with the tone and stuff. But I think that without that kind of serious dramatic structure, none of these movies would be funny. Like you're laughing because you're relating to the emotional experience of the characters.
But also the fact that I'm asking the question is partly because not everyone goes with that ethos. You can sit through a film and you can see where the jokes have come first and the drama's been shoehorned in afterwards. And you've been fairly open on your writing process that it's like hundreds of drafts.
It's so many drafts.
Hundreds of drafts. So, for instance, I mean, on your Cordially Invited, for instance, if I found draft 17, for instance, or the draft, even the third one, I'm just kind of curious how it would materially differ from what I saw.
Yeah.
And enjoyed. I mean,
I think I start probably when I'm writing, I probably start broad. I start broad and get less and less broad over the many drafts. And as I kind of dig in and zero into what the movie's about.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to kind of get to the core emotional experience of the characters. And it takes a while. I mean, writing, the reason I love it and the reason it's hard is it's essentially therapy, and you're trying to figure out what you're trying to say as you write. And the only way to know what you're trying to say is to keep writing and rewriting and rewriting. And then eventually there comes a moment where you're like, oh, this is what I've been trying to say. And it's usually something that it's something that I've been thinking about and thinking about as a person, in some way.
Do you start dark and go light? Is that part of it as well? Does the tone shift?
The tone, I tend to be pretty. No, it's not. It doesn't. I don't tend to write that dark ever, really.
Yeah.
I mean, if it demands it.
It got a bit dark in Muppets Most Wanted.
Muppets Most Wanted got dark with
Constantine.
Constantine was pretty dark.
Yeah.
But no, I don't. I mean, honestly, Get Into the Greek is probably the darkest I got because he's a heroin addict, so you kind of have to. But even in that, I made the choice not to show needles and stuff because I was like, this tonally feels like not the right kind of thing. So I think, but yeah, I tend to stay pretty light. But there's always a core of serious stuff there, always, every time.
I bring up a film that you wrote an awful lot in interviews with other filmmakers because for me, it is a cast iron example of stakes in a movie and why they matter. And it's Captain Underpants.
Oh, Rick, that's funny.
Which is genuinely a film I absolutely adore. My kids like it as well. Sometimes I watch it with them. But also, in terms of stakes, it's the best in a big film I've seen since The Goonies, in terms of what's actually at stake for those characters. And the whole idea that it's not about saving the world, it's they might get split up in class. And it's the smallest thing to all of us, and it's the hugest thing to them. And I remember watching that film and caring enormously whether those two, in an Underpants film, right? Whether those two would be in different classes. And so I talk about it an awful lot. And looking back through your film, in the nicest sense, inverted commas, low stakes is kind of a recurring theme, isn't it? You know?
Well, I think it's true. It's true in life, and so I usually,
but not true in movies as a rule.
Not true, it's boring when a superhero is just trying to save the world. You're like, okay, that's so generic, it's so general, versus like, and it took a while to get to those stakes. I remember the stakes
tell me.
I mean, it's I wrote that script over many years. It was a long development process, which is normal for animation. And a lot of it was going back to the IP and going back to Dave Pilkey, who's brilliant, kind of explained, Dogman, exactly. He explained the theory of these characters, and he explained that it's these kids against the world, and their friendship is the most important thing, and adults are the enemy in that world. That was like, he was like, that's what it is. And then, like a moron, I tried a lot of other stuff before I went back to what he had said. And then, and it was that was kind of the first. Well, it was the second IP because I did Muppets, but that was where I kind of start to understand. Oh, with IP, you really have to go with what the original creator intended because it's built in a certain way. And so we kind of gravitated back towards their friendship, and their friendship being the most important story, almost like Superbad. Superbad became a reference for us in that film.
I see that.
And that really, I mean, I have like an 8-year-old, and she was not with her friends last year, and this year she is with her friends, and she was like so happy to be put in the same class with her friends. So it kind of was like, oh, this would be the worst possible thing that could happen to these two kids for them to be separated. And we were like, oh, that's what the whole movie should be built around. And you're cordially invited. Obviously the stakes are about Will and his daughter. Are they going to be able to figure out the relationship? Is Reese and her family going to be able to figure out the relationship? But that's not the plot. The plot is like, how are we going to split up this venue? That's the plot. And the stakes are small, but the stakes are also huge because how they split the venue and how that plays out will determine their relationships. So it's kind of,
So people on my side of the fence, we first find out about this, I think it was June 2022, where the Hollywood trades are reporting that this is a package and everyone's going to pay you zillions of dollars and stuff like that. When did it actually, putting aside Wikipedia and IMDb trivia for a bit, when did it actually start? When did it trigger in your head?
I had the idea of a double book destination wedding for many years. I thought of that idea a number of years ago, and I was like, that's a really commercial idea.
Yeah.
But I didn't have anything emotional. I didn't have characters, and I was like, well, that's not a movie without any of that stuff. And then for years I wanted to work with Will Ferrell and Reese Witherspoon. I thought they'd be good together in a movie, and I was like, oh, that idea could support them. And I kind of forced myself to kind of develop that idea for them. Figured out those characters, pitched them the idea. Yeah. And they liked the idea, and they liked the idea of all working together. And I started writing the movie, and then it happened pretty quickly. It didn't happen that much before June 2022.
Interesting.
It wasn't, it wasn't that much earlier than that. And this movie, in terms of how movies happened very quickly, and was made really fast. It's been done for a bit. It made the most sense to release it now, but it's been done for a little bit.
So you've given the perfect press junket answer. In a weird way. I know it's not criticism, but it's just like we sit from the outside, and it's just like they were the first choice for that. They were the first choice for that.
It really was that.
And I wrote it for them, and they all instantly said yes. Yeah. I'm not suggesting that wasn't the case here. I'm just trying to get to how uncommon that is across your body of work. And stuff like that. Do you have to get to a certain gravitas as a filmmaker to be able to put that kind of stuff, those kind of people together and interest them?
Yeah, I think I have a body of work now that people can. I have a tone. There's a tone, and I don't. I realized. I think it was around Bros where I would just start. People would be like, "What's this movie like?" And I was like, "I don't know. It's like the other movies I've made." It was a different answer that I just started, and I think that was that it kind of changed how And I think that I don't know if I could have approached actors of that stature if I just made one movie. But at this point, everyone knows the kind of movie I'm going to make, and so. But I've been pretty successful in terms of doing movies that happen with some regularity, and I think it's in working with talent that wants to do a movie with me and wants to do the kind of movie that I want to do. Whether that be signing on to something that is being developed out that I'm not developing, like Neighbours was something that Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg.
Bad Neighbours.
Bad Neighbours. Sorry. Bad Neighbours. Sorry. Bad Neighbours. Doing a terrible English accent. But that was something that Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg were developing with these writers, Brendan O'Brien and Andrew Cohen. They called me about that, and I was like, that was already a package that was together. But I knew my way into that movie, and so I think it's just like kind of knowing your way into a movie makes people more confident and want to do it. So. Yeah.
Also, you've said in interviews in the past, and again, I bring it up because not many people say it, that you like making big Hollywood movies.
Oh yeah.
As if like that's some kind of crime to want to make big Hollywood movies. And to a degree, my test is because I interviewed Barry Sonnenfeld a couple of weeks ago.
Oh yeah.
His book's fascinating. I'm sure I'll come to that. But you go even through. You'd think Barry Sonnenfeld's a commercial director. But you go through his back catalogue, and there's one film that is unavailable in the UK.
Oh, wow. Which movie?
I go through For Love or Money. Michael Jackson. It was The Concierge in America, I think.
Oh, yeah.
But it's unavailable, a universal release picture. And film preservation is quite a big thing for me.
Yeah.
The only film of yours that I couldn't find, because I try and watch the film I've not watched, but then I thought, I've watched all of your films.
Yeah.
I've watched every one apart from Entry Level. Then I look it up, and it's a half hour.
It's a pilot, yeah.
Yeah, I get that. And that's the only thing of yours I couldn't find to watch.
Yeah.
And I just wonder if, I don't know, just to fashion it into a question. Films are nothing without an audience. And there's a kind of snobbery towards films sometimes that play to an audience. Why have you always been so resistant to that?
Oh, I don't, I just like the movies that I love are, the kind of like when Harry Met Sally is one of my favorite movies, and that's like a big
you
commercial.
Can tell.
Yeah, it's a big commercial romantic comedy. It's really funny. It's very human. I would say the thing that I hate the most in anything is if it's boring. That's it. And I think anything that's boring is a failed piece of art in terms of a narrative, in terms of trying to tell a movie or TV show. If it's boring, you failed.
Yeah.
and so that, so I'm always trying to entertain, because that's part of it. It's part of telling your story is to get people interested in your story. And I don't know. I don't really see much of a difference between genres, between what's commercial and what isn't. I tend to personally am attracted to stories that are commercial for whatever reason. I just like that's. I don't know why. I
like watching them.
Yeah, I just think it's fun. You know, like why wouldn't you know? But but I think that I don't know. I don't know why. It's always just been true of the kinds of stories, and it's true of also the kinds of movies I like to watch. They tend to be a bit more commercial. They tend to be a bit more entertaining. If something is very, very slow, I kind of am just not that interested unless it's Stanley Kubrick, and then I'll watch it.
I'm just reading the book, The Odyssey, at the moment. Still, it's a very, very big book, the Stanley Kubrick one.
Oh yeah.
You're also someone in my mind, and again, I'm an outsider to your world, but you had a sort of turning point film for Hollywood's approach to romantic comedies, I think, just in terms of audience turning out to watch them. And it's no slight on the film at all, because I really like the 5-Year Engagement. I think that's a smart, underrated film. Yeah. But I remember, I was at Den of Geek when that came out. I remember interviewing Jason Segel for it. Might have even been in this room, I don't know.
Yeah.
And I remember him posting ahead of that something along the lines of, "What do you think it will do at the box office this weekend? 30 million, something like that." and then it didn't. And I looked at that and I just thought that I don't know why that's happened. I don't know why the audience didn't come out for that film. And then after that, I didn't see the audience come out for a big romantic comedy again. Really.
Yeah.
And it strikes me that you kind of like wrestled this back with your Cordially Invited. But I just wonder if you felt that a little bit, that like you were making a genre, you were working in a genre that was so hugely popular for ages, and through no fault of your own, I don't think, personally, the audience sort of moved on while you weren't looking.
Yeah. I love that movie.
It's really good.
Yeah. And the idea behind that movie was like when the rom-com, we wanted to tell a story about when the romantic comedy ends.
Yes.
And what the relationship really starts.
And less nasty the breakup.
Yeah. And I think that movie is, while it looks commercial and has like a commercial sheen, it's kind of a pretty harsh like exploration of like, a relationship that is like complex and dealing with real issues. It also, I think that's true of all the movies I do, but there's also, I think, you need, and something I learned, and the kinds of movies I try to make, you have to take a commercial idea and combine it with real emotion. And it's this kind of alchemy that needs to happen. And I think that's true of any successful movie. It could be an Oscar movie, it could be whatever, but like you need both things to have a successful film, to have a commercially successful film. Yeah. And I think there is no wish fulfillment for anyone in a 5-year engagement. And that's what I discovered like after that movie came out, that the wish fulfillment, I'm talking purely commercial, not artistically, the money side of it, that people would see that trailer and be like, well, I don't want to be in a 5-year engagement. That sounds like a bummer. And that was literally it. And so it was hard to sell that idea versus, if that makes sense.
But then also the breakup, 6 years before, had been a monster hit, and it was two people arguing. Yeah. For God knows how long.
I know. And I kept thinking about that movie too as we were making it. Yeah. I think that there was the promise in the trailers, and I'd have to look at that, of them getting back together. There was some kind of...
It's interesting, isn't it? Just the tiny little...
I think it's just like you just need a little wish fulfillment, and like them having revenge against each other, there's something fun about that. I'm going to get back at my ex, there's something fun about that. The breakup, it's like whereas the 5-year engagement, it's like, again, no one really wants to be in that long. This is my theory. I don't really know, because I love the movie, and people who respond to that movie love that movie. So it's kind of
it's a better film on the second watch. As well, because there's something to it. Yeah. In the nicest sense. It's just like I remember watching it the first time. I think, oh yeah, it's pretty good. I went back to it about a year later. It's like, oh, holy shit! Actually, I see something more there that I wasn't expecting. I want to bring in as well a sort of Back to the Future rule that works through your film as well, in that Back to the Future famously doesn't actually have a villain. Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. Well, Biff, kind of.
But not. He's a villain in the second. My theory on this, he's a villain in the second and the third films because he's actively trying to stop them directly.
Oh, right.
But in the first film, he's just following what he wants to do, and it happens to get in the way.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And it took me 10 watches of that film, which were very pleasurable to work out. Yeah. That there's no actual traditional villain in it. Yeah. But there isn't in your films either.
No.
And I've read in interview. I know you've talked about this before. I've read in interviews about how that's something very deliberate,
Yeah.
baked into kind of like the movies and the stories that you want to tell. I mean, inevitably, you've got all these little things that contribute to the stories you want, and also the hundreds of drafts that go to make them. I just wonder if there's a coincidence to that. How hard you have to fight sometimes to keep those rules.
Yeah.
Rules in pencil, I'd imagine.
Yeah, I think just it naturally happens as I do draft after draft. I mean, the best example of de-vilifying something was in Bad Neighbours.
Yes.
I said it correctly.
Yes, Welcome to the UK.
Yeah, where, you know, the first draft of that movie, which was very funny, which Brendan and Andrew wrote, it was about, like, it was Seth and two buddies fighting this frat. And the Zach character was kind of just a bad guy. He just, like, was a bad guy. There was a lot of funny stuff in it. As we worked on the drafts, we were like, oh, if it was Seth, if he was married with a kid, it would be him and his wife dealing with this. So we kind of got rid of the friends for the most part and just made it him and his wife. And we were like, that's a really funny dynamic. And we kept doing it. And then Zach read the draft, and Zach Efron, and he was like, I think Teddy would be nice. And we were like, that's his character's name. We were like,
interesting.
And we were like, oh my God, of course he would be nice.
Yeah.
Of course he would be. And so then we were like, he'd love his brothers, and the reason he's the head of that frat is everyone likes him, and he's like nice. And so that completely, he doesn't like the old people next door, but he'd be nice to his buddies. And so that completely changed the movie and made it way better. And there was stuff in the movie that I just couldn't put my finger on that I just didn't like. I just was like, I don't know how to direct this scene where he's just mean. And it was because it wasn't human. And people, I mean, 99.9% of people are just human people trying to do their best, I think, and so, I think I have a generally positive outlook on, it's hard in this moment, but I have a generally positive outlook on humanity. And I think that that's why people responded to that movie. There were no villains in it. They're just people trying to figure it out.
There was something quietly radical about that film though, as well, wasn't there?
Yeah.
In that Rose Byrne's character in any film like 10 years before would have been the wife trying to nag and trying to stop. Yeah. And in the two Bad Neighbours films, like, as you know, she is like as much trouble as anyone else.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't be quietly radical, but you had this again with Bros, I suspect.
Yeah.
That you're talking about things that shouldn't be radical, but sort of are.
Yeah, it should be radical. Yeah, I remember we kept getting this note for Rose that they were like, the first night when Seth goes there, they were like, Rose shouldn't go there. She shouldn't go over to the frat. And we were like, Rose was like, I would want to go to the frat.
Yeah.
It's like, and that dynamic too, when my wife and I, we love each other, but we also have a lot of fun together. And when we had our first kid, our baby, our oldest daughter's now 17, but when she was a baby, we were like, we can't have fun anymore. This sucks. Like, we can't go out. Like, all of this stuff that they're trying to do.
I'm a parent. I fully understand.
Yeah. But it was both of us. It wasn't just me being like, I want to go out. She also was like, I miss going out. I miss getting drunk. I miss doing all this stuff. And some of that stuff comes back. But it wasn't just me. And so it felt dishonest to tell a story where only Seth would care about that. Rose would have cared about that too. And so and again, it took many drafts to get there, because you're also trying to figure out what you're trying to say as you're doing these drafts. But yeah.
There was, I listened religiously to Roger and James Deakin's podcasts. Well, which is really quite something. They had on there the director of photography. I'm going to scroll desperately to try and find the name. Andrew somebody. Andrew. I'm going to edit round this, and it's going to sound absolutely great. God, my eyesight's gone to bits. Andrew Dunn, as I was saying, was the director of photography on that film, and he's done
on Bad Neighbours,
on The Bodyguard. Sorry, let me start that again. Yeah. I listen religiously to loads of seamless. I'm just going to leave it all in there. It's just like loads of Roger Deakins podcasts, and listening to Andrew Dunn, the cinematographer, talk on that. And he came from doing the Madness of King George and things like that, but then he came to shoot The Bodyguard, and he was talking about. Not going back to this whole big movie thing as well, shooting movie stars as movie stars. And there's almost been a little bit of resistance to the idea that when you light and you frame a movie star in a big movie with movie stars, as you have just made, he almost has to explain the fact that he wants to light them to look like movie stars. He wants them to like lift off the screen in the ways that like people were doing in the 40s and 50s and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I thought that was really interesting.
So
I'd never heard anyone talk about that before. I'm curious what conversations you have, therefore, when you come to shoot a film like this, because you know it's going to be a big romantic comedy. Soon as you know Amazon's putting the money in as well, I'd imagine you know it's going to go everywhere as well.
Yeah.
And you want it to look big and movie-like, don't you?
Yeah.
What are the decisions you're making?
Yeah, I mean, I want my movies to look beautiful, and I really wanted this movie to be. I wanted this movie specifically to be beautiful.
Could you define beautiful?
Yeah, I wanted people to want to be on Palmetto Island, the fake island we created. I wanted people to want to be there. Honestly, I kept thinking about Sarah Marshall and how I shot that intentionally to make people want to go to Hawaii. So I wanted people to want to be on Palmetto Island. I wanted it, on Neighbours. We did almost the whole. On Bad Neighbours. Bad Neighbours. It was all handheld. There was kind of a rough element to it. We wanted it to feel rough and kind of, rough. I don't know how else to put it. And with this one, I wanted it to be more kind of composed. I also knew every shot was going to have like 10 people in it. Yeah. And so that was a big part of it. The composition was really important to me, because every it's a wedding movie, and there's this kind of obscure Robert Altman movie called A Wedding. It's kind of a weird movie, but there's always like 10 people in every shot, and it's just fun. It's a fun way to shoot a movie, and so I knew that I always wanted lots of people in every frame, and I kind of constantly, because in weddings there always are lots of people around, and so that was another thing that was pretty intentional, and then I wanted, I started to also realize, this was in pre-production, that a big artistic inspiration for that movie is this musical, A Little Night Music. It's a Stephen Sondheim musical. Yeah. I actually, the first time I saw it, I was like 22, and I saw it at the National Theater here with Dame Judi Dench. It was incredible.
You went with Dame Judi Dench.
She was in it. She was in it.
I was going to say, that's an amazing night out.
I know.
She's got stories.
I know. Exactly. Yeah. But it was like, it blew my mind as but it's about a lot of people. And then I saw it again with my wife a few years later in New York. But it's about a lot of people falling in love. It's one of the only Sondheim musicals that ends happily. Yeah. So there's some, so there's some similarities. I also, in the movie, if I'm going to get kind of pretentious for a second, kept thinking about like Shakespeare and his comedies and how they always end with a wedding. And you're often going, I think it's Midsummer's Night Dream, where they go into the woods. Yeah. A lot of stuff happens in the woods, and then they come out of the woods. And I was like, they're all going into the woods. They're all going to Palmetto Island, this kind of magical place. And then they all need to leave the woods and like re-enter reality. And so it was there was a lot of thought that went into the look, but then at the end of the day, I just shoot what happens. I don't want to get too tricky.
But also, I mean, I'm sure you get asked at 7 billion junkets about the whole improvisation thing, and I kind of want to come at it from a slightly different way, because presumably, you looking at your stuff, the structure of it is too strong for it to be more than 10% improvisation.
Yeah, that's about right. Yeah.
Is that about it? That's blown the question completely. Then we've done question and answer all in one go. And so when you come to shoot, something like this, I mean, you talked about having lots of people in frame. And it's just I remember it was Gil Keenan, wasn't it? Directed the last Ghostbusters film.
Oh yeah.
And had to block a shot which had like them all in there. I'm going spoiler light. Yeah. I remember talking to Matthew Warchus, who directed a film over here called Pride. I don't know if you ever saw that. It's an absolute delight.
I've heard that's amazing.
One of the funniest films I've seen.
I need to see that movie.
But he talked there. I mean, that was a very low budget film. But he talked to me about how he spent his money on human beings in a camera, and he knew it would cost him setups. And he knew it would be tricky and stuff like that. But the value of having 10 people on a shot.
Oh, yeah.
Because that's, ironically, we're in a world, as you know, where AI is replacing the human being, and the effect will come in instead of the human. I watched an Alien film that had a computer character in it over the summer. It's just crazy. It's weird. The value of the human being in shot, though, is, again, I was just thinking about things that run through your film. And it's not unusual, is it, that you have, you give yourself, let's just say, blocking challenges.
Yeah. I mean, with this movie, we also, so John Guleserian was my DP, and he, he's amazing, and he's really fast, which is, but his stuff, his light's very beautiful.
Clint Eastwood fast.
He's so fast. But he, we the other thing about this movie is we had 3 cameras almost all the time, and it was so helpful.
And it was always like that. You said you were handheld on.
On Neighbours, I almost always
Bad
have 2
Neighbours.
cameras. I've started to shift to 3 cameras.
Yeah.
Because
Ridley Scott's at 11. You've still got.
he is
ways
11.
to
I
go.
know, I have a lot of cameras left. You know, Seth Rogen said something really interesting, which I was like, that's really, I think he's right about that. He was like, you should either have 1 camera or 3 cameras. And I kind of agree with him.
Gotcha.
Which
Okay.
I think is like, because you either have 1 camera because you're like, you're doing a very specific shot, you're doing, you're like Wes Anderson, or you're doing something very specific, that's, or you're trying to get as much material as possible. Now with Cordially, there were always so many people in shot that I was trying, and I was also in a bit of,
Gotcha.
that I wanted to kind of shoot the coverage as quickly as I could. And we were also often outside, and we were also often in large spaces. And so that allows you to fit the cameras in. It allows you to fit all the cameras in. And so it really is a great way to shoot a movie, I find.
Is it as much fun when you get to the edit room?
Yeah, definitely. Because you have, and I don't do, I think there's a misconception that there's like a ton of improv, as you said, that it's about 10%. I'm
really pleased I nailed that.
You nailed it, yeah. You nailed it. So there's not like, there's options, I wrote a lot of jokes before we started shooting with my writer, Brendan O'Brien, who co-wrote Bad Neighbours. And so he's super funny, and he thought of a lot of funny jokes, and I also do a lot of like pitching jokes as we're shooting and yelling out jokes and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I've seen Paul Feig do that.
Yeah, so it's like Paul Feig, it's the same thing or just like Judd Apatow. Like we're all part of the same.
I figured that.
Crew, yeah. So I do a lot of that too. But it tends to all be on story. It has to be on story, otherwise there's just no reason to have it,
So one of the things Jason Segel told me when you're doing the 5-year engagement was every time someone else was cast, you do another pass at the script. Not a page 1, but another pass just at the scenes they're going to be in. One of my favourite actors of her generation at the moment is Geraldine Viswanathan, I want to pronounce it. Is that correct?
I think it's, that's on Viswanathan.
Yeah. Okay, so I saw her in Blockers and just like, oh God, because it's not just the comedy. She can act. I bought the character completely, even before. So when you add someone like her, for instance, and so you've gone out to Will Ferrell, you've gone out to Reese Witherspoon. I figure everyone's asking you about them. That's why I'm kind of like, they're getting a lot of press, I figure. But Geraldine, let me call her that. Let me go in for more. I just think is a hell of a talent flying under a load of people's radars at the moment. When you land her, how does your script change? What do you do?
I wrote it for her.
Oh no, you can't give me another press junkie answer.
I wrote it for her. I've been obsessed with her too since Blockers. I think she's incredible.
Blockers is a great film.
Yeah, and there's something about her. I was like, she seems like Will Ferrell's daughter. I don't know why. She just seems like it. She has a playfulness and a lightness. There's something about her. She just seemed like she'd be his daughter. And so from the beginning, I was like, I wanted to be her. And then we did a table read, and she did it. She did the table read, and she was incredible. And we just asked her. I mean, it was a very like, I thought it should be her, and then it was her, and then she was amazing, and she kind of really grounds their relationship. Like she's like so real, and she could be light, she could be funny, but she's also like she's playing this confused character who's a little bit younger than. I mean, she's very young, but it's a little bit younger than she is. And she plays that character with a lot of like earnestness and warmth, and and it really grounds. It makes that whole plot work. I think with a different actress, it could have just totally sunk, and felt jokey or something,
Yeah, but also with her, it could have worked as drama as well.
Oh yeah, totally.
It keeps coming back to that. Yeah. I wonder. I'm reading a book at the moment, as well as the Kubrick one, by Edward Burns, who's wrote this book. I've only just found it, called Independent Ed, and he wrote a rom-com. And I've got to the bit last night, I was just like, I've got to bring this up today. He talked about how when he was writing about a rom-com, how he struggled. He said, the early drafts of my script were pretty good, but fell apart in the third act, as happens with a lot of comedies, because you have to go big and ridiculous at the end.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, I understand going big, not necessarily ridiculous, but do you feel that? Do you feel I don't know, would you agree with what he's saying?
No. I don't think so. I mean, I don't want to.
No, he writes different films. It's just like, I'm not slighting one person over the other.
You just want it to be, I don't know. You want the end to be satisfying in some way. But I try to just think about what the story demands at that moment. But I don't tend to think like, oh, I've got to really blow it out of the water here. One of, I like years and years ago, I asked Nora Ephron to drinks.
What a line to drop in.
I know.
I
was like, would you? And she was famous for being a mentor figure.
Yeah, of course.
So I asked my agent, I was like, would she ever do this? And he was like, totally. And she does this with people. So I asked her, 'cause she's like the master of the kind of writing I hope to do. And I asked her about writing, and she said that Mike Nichols gave her this advice. I was like, oh my God, this is the greatest night of my life. Where he splits a script into 8 chapters. And each chapter, it's like 2 chapters for the first act, 4 chapters for the second act, 2 chapters for the third act. And each chapter, the entire story changes. And you want the whole story to change. And so that's really all I think about is what is the chapter, what needs to be changing in this moment. And I think that's, another weird writing lesson I got, and this is so random, is that I'm sure you wrote about when they rewrote the third act of World War Z. World War Z, and they changed it
David
to just...
Lindelof came,
David Lindelof, and they changed it from...
Peter Capaldi in, God bless him.
What's that?
Peter Capaldi comes in as the Who Doctor, which for Doctor Who nerds at the time was just gold.
But it just was like, it went from this global, like, there's thousands of zombies running, to just like a thing in a lab, and it totally worked. It didn't need to be some giant, like, end of the world thing. They're just like trying to get like a, and so it doesn't need to be big and ridiculous. It just has to be satisfying in some way. And it has to pay off the characters that you've created, Often I'll have to do reshoots to find that, Although on this one, on this and on Bros, I didn't have to do reshoots. So maybe I'm getting better at it. Maybe not. I don't know.
Half the people in the UK call Bros Bros, by the way.
Oh, Bros? That's
funny. Yeah. Just because of the hit band.
Oh, that's funny. Bros.
Of the 80s. It confused me for a while what film you'd made there, but I kind of got there in the end. So you asked Nora Ephron. I'm almost scared to put this out in case you get a deluge. Obviously, this is the most listened to podcast and watched video in the world.
Yeah.
What happens when people write to you and ask you to go for a drink?
It doesn't really happen that often. But I'll give advice to people, definitely. I would definitely. Yeah. But it was, particularly, I was at that point of film. I'd made stuff. It was before 5-year engagement. I wanted to ask her questions about that.
Yeah. Incredible.
Yeah. So yeah.
Incredible. I'm coming nearly to the end of my time, and I've managed to restrain myself and not really go for Muppets yet.
Oh yes.
And Muppets is very, very, very dear to my heart,
as they are to mine.
Yeah, you could tell. And again, this was something I talked to Jason Segel about a long time ago. And one of the things I read an interview where you said you sort of went into that first Muppets film not knowing how they made a Muppets film.
Oh yeah.
And it's quite interesting. It kind of segues into a question about your Cordially Invited, because I just wonder how your writing differs when you don't have to do the directing.
Oh,
does it shape it a little bit different?
Yeah, it's different. Yeah. It's really different.
Give other people the problem. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm much more stressed out when I'm writing to direct because everything is my problem.
Do you make that decision early on that you're going to write it to direct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. With Muppets, they were asking me from the beginning if I wanted to direct it, and I was like, I'm just not the right person for this. And James Bobin was 100% the right person for it. He is obsessed and knows more about Muppets than anyone I know.
But what about Dora the Explorer then? Because that film also is great.
Yeah.
Completely flew under the radar.
Yeah.
How come you swapped on that one as well then?
I was never going to direct that.
Oh, that's not what the internet says, and the internet's right about everything.
Yeah, exactly. I wasn't. Yeah, I wrote it. Yeah, I wrote it. I just love. I figured out a fun story, and I was like, "Oh, this could be fun." And then I was so excited. James is a good friend of mine.
No,
yeah, and he's just like, and when he signed on, I was like, "Oh my God, this is gonna be so much fun!" And he's just gonna nail it because he's such a good director. So yeah.
So when you've written certain things for the Muppets to do you then meet one of the Muppeteers who wants to take you around the back and smack 7 shades out of you for things that you've written?
Oh, definitely. So our first draft now I'm sure I don't know but Jason and we wrote that over many years.
I get that.
It took a while. There was development, but also Disney was didn't know what to do with the Muppets, and it took a while to,
and still doesn't,
and still don't. They still don't know.
Yeah.
And it took them a minute to figure out what they wanted to do with Muppets, and at the same time they were developing. We were writing our script, but our initial drafts were totally. Now that I think about it, it was pretty funny. It was Jason does a show on the Venice Boardwalk with a puppet, and then it turns out the puppet is a Muppet.
Yeah.
And then the Muppeteers were like, no, they're not puppets. They're real creatures that live. They're Muppets. They live in the world. That's one of the rules. And they gave us all the rules. And we were like, oh, I understand. We have to follow these rules. And suddenly everything started to click into shape in terms of the kinds of rules that we need to follow. And we changed the script to fit those rules. And then when James came on board, he had come from the world of musicals,
of course,
and so he was like each song. And I learned, one of the great things about this industry is I get to learn on every project. And so I got to learn from James. He was like, this is obvious to anyone who watches musicals. A song is the story point.
Yep.
So we would have a scene that was this scene that was a story point and then a song. And he was like, let's just make the song is the story point. Get rid of the scene. The song is the story point. Or let's turn this scene into a song and, da, da, da. And so then it changed again as he started to work on it with Jason and I. And it evolved and got kind of better and better and better because of that collaboration. So,
Nowhere was it more evident than the opening song of Muppets Most Wanted, which packs the tone of Gremlins 2 into 3 minutes flat. I love that.
What's funny about that is we really wanted it to be called The Muppets Again.
I know, but it was still in the song, isn't
I know,
it?
it's still in the song. It was too late. By that point, it was recorded. And then they were like, we can't call it that. We were like, okay, but it was already done in the can. It was done.
Well, the Godfather 3 line came out of the song in the end as well, didn't it?
Yeah. And Toy Story 4, which was there was,
and then it happens.
Then
See,
it happened,
you should write films into your scripts, and then they happen.
Exactly.
It's just like some kind of magic.
Just for movies we want to see.
I think. Well, was there a Muppets 3 in your head? Because I know Jason was a bit fed up after the first one, and I think one or two of the old guys were not as receptive as you'd hope. I remember that at the time.
Yeah, I think Jason also felt like he told the story he wanted to tell, and then
it's a good mic drop moment, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. He did it, and then I mean, it would have been fun to have done another Muppet movie. Definitely, we didn't have anything specific in mind, but it would have been. I mean, I love the Muppets. It would have been fun to do another one.
So, how important is it to you, the writing that you do on family features? And of course, you directed Storks.
Yeah.
As well. How important are those films?
I mean, it's, my kids are getting a little bit older now, but it's always fun to make movies for my kids and for all ages, and I approached family movies exactly the same way I approached.
That's why Dora worked.
Yeah, the adult movies, because as a kid, I liked watching movies that didn't speak down to me. Like, I just kind of subconsciously got it. What's funny about You're Cordially Invited is while it's R-rated, at least, I don't know what that is.
I watched it with my kids.
Yeah, it's barely R. There's like some F-bombs and that's basically it. And my 8-year-old loves that movie. She was like, can we show it at my birthday? And I was like, I don't know if we can show your birthday party.
My 11-year-old really loved it.
Oh, cool.
Really loved it. Interestingly, my 16-year-old daughter also really loved it as well.
That's
It was very rare to get them all to...
Yeah.
Just before I came in, I'm nearly out of time, so just a couple of things. There's a film that you co-wrote. I don't know whether this was down to you, Night School, which is another one of those that flew under the radar.
Yeah.
And like neurodivergence and stuff is really important to me. I work with a lot of people.
Yeah.
And there's a character in that film which never got the credit. The character that Kevin plays.
Oh, yeah.
It is the best visual depiction I've seen on a screen and the most sensitive of learning difficulty. I'm just wondering, did that come from you? Was that in part of the script that you were...
I'm trying to remember.
I know it's Malcolm Lee's film, but it's just like...
movie, to be honest, I was one of a few writers.
I get that.
And I literally don't remember.
Okay. Well, I try and name check.
But I'll take credit for it.
I like your style.
Yeah.
I mean, in theory, the clickbait gods now tell me that I should wrap up by asking you about like why you're making Terminator 2 Judgment Day as your next film, which Judgment Day I think it's called.
Yeah.
I'm more interested though in just like because we've seen over the last year that people towards the end of their career, and we're both young men, we're both a long way away from the end of their career, have that passion project. Yeah. And so you've got Kevin Costner with his Horizons. Yeah. You've got Francis Ford Coppola with their Megalopolis, the bit where I don't care anymore, I'm just going to make it come what may.
Yeah.
What's in your... If I hacked your laptop, which I'm not doing, I've distracted you for 45 minutes.
Yeah.
But are there the ones that kind of you're just saving until, I don't know, about 10 years down the line?
I don't really have that project that, I again am pretty commercially minded, and I kind of get inspired per each movie, and then really fall into a rabbit hole of the movie I'm working on, so, and that's what's happening right now with Judgment Day.
Terminator 2 Judgment Day.
Terminator 2 Judgment Day. Yeah. We might have to change the title.
Not in the UK, it'll be fine.
Yeah, exactly. But Bad Judgment Day.
Yes. See.
But I think there isn't really. I mean, sometimes I'm like, again, because it was an inspiration for this movie and it's one of my favorite things, the idea of turning this musical, Little Night Music, into a movie would be a dream.
Interesting.
But it is a bit obscure, I think. I mean, people who love musicals know this musical, but it's a little obscure.
Isn't Richard Linklater spending 20 years making a
He's
song?
He's doing Merrily We Roll Along.
Yeah.
He's doing Merrily, and that's an amazing musical as well.
Yeah.
But because I've listened to Little Night Music so many times, I've thought of different ways it could be shot as a musical, as a movie musical, and this and that. But would I ever pursue it? I don't know, because it's not. At the end of the day, that's Stephen Sondheim's work of art. It's not mine.
Would
so
you
I
write
would
a
feel
musical?
Would I? No.
Another musical.
Oh, would I write? I mean, I could imagine being a writer. I could imagine being a writer, like as part of a, you know, not. I couldn't imagine directing an original musical because honestly, I like movie musicals, but I don't love them. They're not like my favorite thing. I did love Wicked though, I have to say.
Yeah.
So it's and I do love musicals like live. I just saw Guys and Dolls in London. It was incredible. So I do love the live experience of a musical. But when I think about my favorite movies, they don't tend to be movie musicals, except for, of course, for Muppet musicals.
You should do the stage adaptation of Team America World Police.
Oh my God, that is the best musical.
That's the musical.
That is the South Park movie.
Nicholas Stollleer, huge congratulations on your film and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. This was a great conversation.
I really enjoyed that. And thank you, everybody.
Very cool.